Then we have started. I've started the recording, and I want to welcome everybody to Unitarian Universalist Justice Ohio's webinar and discussion, and we hope there's lots of discussion, on the chapter of Theology in Widening the Circle of Concern, the report from the UUA Commission on Institutional Change. And most of you received some video links and a link to the actual report itself if you don't already own it in hard copy, but we'll talk about that as we go through here. But let's start with a chalice lighting by Linda Hale.
Thanks, Joan. So if we could have the chalice.
Give it just a minute as I do the screen share.
And then let's have a moment of silence before I start. When I breathe in peace. When I breathe out love. When I breathe in peace. When I breathe out love. When I breathe in peace. When I breathe out love.
Thank you. And with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Carol Womeldorf, who's going to talk to us about introductions and agenda and things like that.
Hello. We're all going to write in the chat now our full name, pronouns, where you live, kind of what corner of the state, and any congregational affiliation. And if you happen to need a copy of a link to the Widening the Circles, we can get that to you too. So please go ahead and write in the chat right now. And we don't mean to silence you all, but we're trying to do a little bit of time consolidation with this. So we'll look forward to hearing from you on the more substantive matters. The agenda is has already covered the chalice lighting. I'm doing introductions and the agenda and the agreement and the session purpose. And then that's me. Linda, you already heard. You could wave if you want, if she's still on the screen. There she is. Reverend Joan is going to do Introduction to Evolving Theology. There she is. Introduction to UU as a Living Tradition, Reverend Kelly Kelly. Want to give us a wave? There she's down there. Myths Commonly Believed Among Us by Reverend Mel. Going to give us a wave. Where'd he go? There he is. Okay. And Theology of Covenant, Samuel Prince. Can you give us a wave, Samuel? Hello. And then we'll do some breakout groups for discussion questions and do a group debrief and check homework and checkout. Thanks to Lori, and there she's giving us a wave too. And then Linda will close us out at the end. By this time, we've gotten a good number of y'all's affiliations and so name, pronouns, location, congregation. Thanks so much for putting that in the chat. And so we're kind of got some guidelines for being together, and we'd like you to kind of read through these and raise your hand like that if you want to kind of acknowledge that these make sense to you and you agree to those. If you have any questions or feel like something's missing, let us know. So in particular, if you agree, we'd like you to risk vulnerability and courageous sharing. Speak from your own experience. Share the airspace. Listen deeply to one another. Be intentional about the language that you use. And take responsibility for the impact of your words. So we really appreciate that. So you can go under reactions. There's a raise hand option right there. And that's also nice to see. And I got some people doing the physical. Great. And some of you give me a thumbs up. Good. All right. Okay. All right. I'm not sure that we've gotten everybody, but I think we've gotten the vast majority. So nobody has any concerns about the guidelines. All right. Thanks so much. We'll go to the next slide. And you can lower your hand so it puts you back. The purpose of this session is really, actually, it was sort of called to us by the first chapter that we went through, which was called Living Our Values in the World, within this book called Widening the Circle of Concern. In that chapter that talks specifically about how there's many folks who are, and we're part of the part of the crowd as far as UU Justice Ohio, that are focused on this kind of trying to fix the world out there in social justice activism. And what we're called to by widening the circle of concern by the text there is to ensure that our spiritual aspects are not left aside, that we to root our calls to justice and cultural competency with a theological foundation that clarifies the connection between the action in the world and our spiritual development. You know, why do we do what we do? And it gives it meaning. And so part of those questions we're going to be asking are, what is our Unitarian Universalist theology? We all know about the 7 principles, but there's more. Another piece that might play into that is congregational polity, and thinking about the people leading rather than being led by some higher organization. And then evolving that or expanding that or seeing that as a liberatory, which is kind of a UU version of a non-biblical liberation theology that lifts up the voices of those most impacted. So that's a real quick summary of kind of what we're going to work with. But and it's just kind of important to remember that what we sort of take for granted doesn't always sustain us, and we need to be more mindful about why we do what we do and what it means, and then we can transmit that meaning as well as the good works, and hopefully more good works because of the meaning. I'm going to pass the hat.
Thank you. All right. Well, before we get into discussions about Unitarian Universalist theology and where it's headed in the future, we should know a little bit more about the roots of our own non-creedal tradition. Now, this is not the Reader's Digest condensed version that I'm going to give you right now. This is the postcard version. Okay. And right now on screen, I have a couple of books that if you are interested in this and want to explore more, these are really accessible, wonderful books that you can pick up easily. Now, contrary to what some folk believe, Unitarian Universalism did not just spring fully formed into being in 1961, like Athena springing from the head of Zeus. But rather, that year, when our two traditions consolidated, they brought with them existing deep theological traditions that were stretching back centuries. The theological principles that we articulate today are the product of a long process of evolution and struggle and change and dialogue. And frankly, the larger society has accused our various ancestors of heresy all along the way. On the Unitarian side, we can trace key theological principles back to the late 1500s and the English Radical Reformation. The theologian Robert Brown articulated the foundations of our congregational polity. What is polity? It's our way of organizing, our way of living together in covenant in congregations. And Robert Brown was labeled a heretic. I mean, he was castigated, and he suffered greatly for his preaching about the nature of congregations and the nature of the Spirit. And he was jailed 32 times for heresy. And over the years, he lost absolutely everything for his beliefs. Now, just to remind us, under congregational polity, each congregation is self-governing, it owns its own property and building, it chooses its own leaders, it decides its own membership requirements, and there's a covenant of conduct and some more. But those are the biggies. Now, this is to be distinguished from episcopal polity, just to let you know, which is governance by a hierarchy of bishops. And it's distinct from Presbyterian polity, which is higher assemblies or courts of congregational representatives exercise authority over individual congregations. So those are the three major kinds of polity. Now, Brown said that at the root of this congregational polity was the belief that the Spirit can speak to individual members of the congregation. Therefore, all members had the right to speak, and the congregation needed to listen carefully to all the voices in decision-making, because the Spirit might be speaking to one person more clearly than to another on any particular issue or day. This is also called continuous revelation. And this belief in continuous revelation influenced our ancestors, the Pilgrims. And it lived on in our Unitarian commitment to uphold the worth and dignity of all persons, the first of our modern principles. And it lives in our commitment to the democratic principle in our congregations and the larger society. And our historical cousins, the United Church of Christ, they assert this understanding when they say that God is still speaking. And you'll see that on their ads and on their buildings, things like that. God is still speaking. Now, in colonial New England, the Pilgrims in the Plymouth colony wound up joining with the Puritans of the Massachusetts Bay colony. They had originally been separate and separate religious commitments. The Puritans were originally focused on cleansing the Church of England of all extraneous non-biblical things. But the Puritans brought with them a strong belief in community and covenant. And they asserted that all social relationships between God and human, ministers and congregation, magistrates and members of the community, and even the relationship between family members were all based on covenants, which rested on consent and mutual responsibility. The concept of covenant has been part of Unitarianism ever since, although quite frankly, at times we have tended to forget about it. Then, next, John Murray brought universalism to the colonies from England in 1774. And his disciple Hosea Ballou soon took it up and preached widely, becoming the father of universalism. But universal salvation of all people by an all-loving God was a central theological belief. So, of course, universalism was accused of being heretical too, because it denied the concept of an everlasting hell. Now, God might punish sinners for a little bit, so believe some of the universalists, but eventually all would be reconciled to a loving God. And at its peak in the 1830s, the Universalist Church was reported to have been the 9th largest denomination in the United States and was huge all along the frontier. And it was known for its support of a number of important social justice causes, such as abolition, the separation of church and state, the rights and the ordination of women, and many more. And this social justice focus is one that we modern Unitarian Universalists inherited from these ancestors. So, at the time of consolidation in 1961, these historic Unitarian elements of continuous revelation and the worth of individuals and democracy and covenant joined with the historic Universalist concepts of the divine as universal love and a commitment to social justice, and we were born. Today, we have our 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism and our 6 sources, and these outline some of our theological affirmations. But these affirmations, these statements, have also grown and evolved over time. The first iteration of a list was a Unitarian statement by the Reverend William Gannett in 1887. It's on the slide now. And it's called Things Most Commonly Believed Among Us. I mean, that's quite a descriptive title, right? And it was written to help calm controversy and to articulate some common ground between the Western Unitarians and the East Coast-based ones who were having quite a bit of conflict at the time. I'm not going to read them all to you, but you can see how these flowed into who we are. The first one, we believe that to love the good and live the good is the supreme thing in religion. We hold reason and conscience to be final authorities in matters of religious belief, and so on and so on. Then, in 1899, the Universalist Church adopted a statement of 5 principles. And these included a belief in God, belief in Jesus Christ, the immortality of the human soul, that sinful actions have some consequence somewhere, either in this life or the next, and universal reconciliation to God, or universal salvation. So that was their 5 principles. Now, in the early 20th century, Unitarianism was deeply influenced by the development of humanism. So in 1933, Raymond Bragg, who was secretary of the Western Unitarian Conference, wrote what's called the Humanist Manifesto to lay out these humanist beliefs. And it was signed by 34 professors and scientists and journalists and a whole bunch of Unitarian clergy. Once again, I'm not going to go through all 15 affirmations because they're incredibly long. Humanists were kind of a wordy bunch. But here are the, you can see the first 4 here on the slide. Religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. Humanism believes that man, 1933, right, is a part of nature and that man has emerged as a result of a continuous process, so evolution. Third, holding an organic view of life, humanists find the traditional dualism of mind and body must be rejected. Well, some interesting truth there. And then humanism recognizing that religious culture and civilization, as clearly depicted by anthropology and history, are the product of a gradual development due to interaction with natural environment. So you can see that the humanists have also had a huge influence on us and even our principles today. Now, at the time of consolidation, 1960, 1961, as these were being hammered out, there were only 6 principles for the new Unitarian Universalist Association. And there were no separate listing of sources. And you can see on the screen here that these were phrased differently and in a different order than the ones we now have. And the sources were kind of intermingled here. But like the first one was to strengthen one another in a free and disciplined search for truth, not meaning yet, but truth, as the foundation of religious fellowship, coming from the humanists. To cherish and spread universal truths taught by the great prophets and teachers of humanity. And at this point, they called it Judeo-Christian. We now call it Jewish and Christian heritage. But you can see that was a source that got put into a separate document or a separate listing. And then, of course, the supreme worth of every human personality and the dignity of man was there as number 3. And then moving on to implement a vision of one world, world community, ideals of brotherhood, justice, and peace, serve the needs of member churches and fellowships, and to organize new ones. Now that's an interesting principle to have in there. And then to encourage cooperation with people of goodwill in every land. So those were our 6 original principles. We had those all the way up to 1985. We didn't change those suckers for quite a while, 24, 25 years. Then in 1985, we instituted the 7 that we now know, and the 5 sources were added. And then we added a 6th source in 1995. And the change to inclusive language and the reordering of the principles was initiated back in 1977 by the Unitarian Universalist Women's Federation as part of a major movement to redefine the place and role of women in Unitarian Universalism and the larger society. That was the Women and Religion Resolution. And so because of their work over the years, we now have our current principles, the ones from 1985. And we have, right now, we're in the middle of a dialogue about a proposed 8th principle, because the principles, as you see, have never been cast in stone. Maybe they've been inscribed, on damp clay for a while, but they're always changing. So we are now thinking about changing them again with the proposed 8th principle that we affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community, by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. We also have our 6 sources, adding the 6th one in 1995, and we tweaked it a little bit in 2018. So these are things you're all familiar with. But in 2018, we changed the words and deeds of prophetic men and women to the words and deeds of prophetic people. Once again, because the Spirit was calling us to be more inclusive in our language and our concepts. Just as in 1995, we added the spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions. So our principles, like I said, have evolved through struggle and dialogue and more dialogue and a hell of a lot more dialogue and compromise and consensus building over the years. The Spirit spoke and people's voices were heard. And I think that that's one of the reasons we call this a living tradition. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to talk more about that living tradition.
Thank you, Joan. It's so fascinating to hear you talk about our faith. I could listen for quite a while. So quite often when we talk about Unitarian Universalism, we talk about it, as Reverend Joan said, as a living tradition. And yet I know that when I'm preaching, I don't usually unwrap or unpack that each time. And so I think one of the important things for us to understand is actually what that means, and ultimately what that calls us to. So I'm going to just discuss it a little bit on my own, kind of riff a bit, and then I'm going to open it up for you all to share your thoughts so that we can really discuss these ideas together. As Reverend Jones said, we believe that each voice is important, and we don't know who the Spirit will be speaking through at any given time. The United Church of Christ, our sibling, one of our sibling denominations, says that God is still speaking. And so this idea of a living tradition is an idea that revelation is not sealed. Now, in other faiths, obviously, we're not the only faith that believes that. The United Church of Christ believes that. And when I think of my limited knowledge of Judaism, my understanding is that the scriptures are treated as a place of beginning, and rabbis and scholars really wrestle with how those ideas and beliefs come into action today in our world. And so we emphasize this wrestling, this wondering, this opening of what it is today. And we can see from the slides, if we remember back to the slides that Reverend Jones shared with us, how much our principles and sources have changed over the years. Now, some of that is around language, which can be easy to dismiss. We all know that mankind means all people. We all know that when we shorten that to man, it means all people. And yet we know that language has power. And some of even the small changes that we've made from listing a binary of men and women to saying people, that actually shows a much larger shift in our understanding that there are not two genders or three or four. There is a wide range of experience and gender expression. And by using that more general word, people, what we're hinting at is that we know our understanding of it is going to change in the future. And so that is the idea of a living tradition in the sense of living, changing, growing. We believe in evolution from a science perspective, and we also believe in it from a thought and belief perspective, which, as I mentioned, it's kind of exciting to think that there may be a sacred text that we are actually writing and creating ourselves right now as we wrestle with these issues of truly integrating social justice and our theology together, as opposed to seeing them as separate. Now, when we were preparing this workshop, one of the points came up about the second part of that word, tradition, and how tradition can mean like a faith tradition. It is an entity. It is a history that goes back and we think will go forward. Also, though, the word tradition means how it has always been done, which implies that it is the way that it always will be done. And so there's this paradox or oxymoron in putting the word living and tradition together. And so being connected to and believing in a non-creedal living tradition calls us to some things. And so what I'd like to do, what we'd like to do is ask, and I'm going to just put it in the chat so it's a little bit easier to think about if you need to come back to the concrete words. If our faith is a living tradition, what does that ask of us? And I welcome you to put your screen on gallery if you don't already have it. Depending on what type of device you have, you might not be able to see everyone because we do have 28 devices tonight, which is pretty awesome. But this will allow us to watch each other's body language a little bit and also notice that, oh, there are two other people who have unmuted themselves and are about to talk. And if it turns out that we do start talking over one another, we can take a step back and I can call on people. So I see in the chat, Karen has told us that the living tradition asks us to have openness and curiosity. Would you like to say a little bit more, Karen? it's always hardest to be the first person.
Times change, you've given very good examples of how times change and thinking changes and needs change, so that if it's to be living, we need to not be afraid to change, but to explore what's important now and work our way into it. Not everybody will get there on the same train, but at least move in that direction so that we are actually growing.
Right. Right. Thank you, Karen. So often when we talk about our churches growing, we talk about these, magic members who are going to come and pay for everything. And what we really want to focus on is growing personally and as a group. So
Right. That's
on.
really that's more what I meant. Yes.
Oh, that's totally. I was just riffing off of what you said. So Lori has bopped in. Would you like to share a little bit more?
Sure. I'm over here. I think that what this calls us for is a whole lot more work, rather than just accepting what has been given to us, to appreciate the gift and recognize the history behind it and how it was formed, but asking the questions of, does it remain relevant today? Does it continue to be a good guide, or is there a better way to create understanding of what is needed today?
Great. Carol?
Sure.
Thank you. Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
There's two Carols. Go, Carol.
Oh, sorry.
Go, Carol. All at you.
Go ahead, Carol W. I'll wait.
Oh, I was gonna wait. Okay. All right. So if our faith is a living tradition, what does that ask of us? I think that it also asks us to respond to the world around us.
Mm.
When we have thousands of people marching in the street for racial justice, and we look at our congregations, and so many of them are so very, very white, and we don't question that might mean that maybe we're not listening, maybe we're not open and curious and honest and reflective and truly valuing the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. I mean, if it's not showing up, then something's missing.
Yeah. Carol Dobbins?
Thanks, Kelly. When we use the term living tradition, that metaphor is rich for me. So I was starting to think, and I just made a small list about what it feels like or it means to me for something to be living. And so I think of something that breathes, and the word breathe and inspire are words that mean the same thing. So I think a living tradition should inspire us. I think it moves. I think a living tradition should move. It should change over time. I hesitate at the word evolve. I mean that, but what I mean is more clearly is that it needs to move through us. It has a heartbeat, so it speaks from the heart. We are thinking people. When we are living, we think. That makes me think that we have reason. We can rely on teachings, and we can learn, and that we grow. We grow in spirit. We grow in size. We grow in our theology. So that it just feels like a really rich metaphor to me.
Awesome. Thank you, Carol. When you said, you know, we think, we feel too, right? And I think, you know, so much of Western society, and this is you use too, right? It's this duality, this binary. It's you're either a thinking person or you're an emotional person. And I believe that I have colleagues who get annoyed when I say the magic, because of course I'm not saying supernatural, but the miracle is that we do both. And when we do both, we do transform, right? We know that emotion can take us down paths that, you know, aren't healthy or productive. And we also know that if we stay too much in our minds, you know, there are logical defenses of doing things that are inhumane. We need to be able to feel and connect to others too. And so I love how you really talked about all of the things and many of the things that make something live and be alive.
I like your addition of feeling. You can check with my partner. That's the piece I often miss personally as well. But I just was reading something and heard the phrase, the magic of love.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not the supernatural magic. It's more the awe and the excitement and the unpredictability of love.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else have anything they want to add? I know that when I'm doing something new, I'm pretty uncomfortable. My tummy hurts usually, and I don't do it well. And I often dread doing it. And so that might also be something that we're called to, is to learn not how it is to not be an expert, how to do something poorly, but keep on trying and improving.
Another phrase of that for leaning into the discomfort.
Yeah. Susan, I saw that you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I guess when I think of something being living, you know, when I think of human beings, supposedly, what is it, every 7 years, all of our cells are different and new, and yet we're fairly recognizable.
Right.
Not as much as I used to be, but still there. So, you know, there's this tension between having something that's consistently recognizable and dependable and that feels like a consistent essence. And then also the ability to figure out what needs to change and how much of it needs to change. And there's never change without conflict. And I don't,
loss.
Yeah, I don't think we're particularly that much better at conflict than any other denomination or faith tradition. If not, maybe a little worse. I don't know. Maybe just because I have to deal with it, and I know I don't like it.
Yeah.
So part of growing is almost always figuring out, you know, how you're going to deal with conflict and resolve relationships. And
Yeah.
I know my husband and I have talked about the fact that we don't have big arguments. I worked on the staff of my church once, and I had a supervisor who said, "You can just come in my office anytime and yell at me." And I was like, "Lady, you have got to be kidding. That is never going to happen." You know, in my closest relationship, there's a principle of that people argue to find out who cares most. And then you let the person who cares most have their way, unless it's really important.
Mm-hmm.
And only then do you get into the really kind of conflict.
Right.
So, you know, I don't know how well we are at getting past the nice dancing around each other.
Well, right. So living is real, right? It is And honestly, it's kind of messy, right? Like bodily functions and all. So that is something that, you know, that this tradition, if it's living, is maybe calling us to. So thank you so much, Susan. As some of you have said, this metaphor is incredibly rich, and I'm excited about how you've already thought of it. I want to give Mel, Reverend Mel, an opportunity to kind of take us a little bit further on our journey together. Reverend Mel?
Hello. So, what do we really know? What's true? What's not? What's factual? What do we think is true and it may not be true? There's these kind of understandings. What are some of the myths that commonly are believed among us? It's important to kind of pay attention to this and sort this out, and to be able to lift it up and to be able to have conversation from honest perspectives. We need to find out what our perspectives are. So, and also we need to, the first recommendation, I'm going to lift that up, that is listed, is that it says re-engaging with our theological legacy and its use today will both ground our efforts to welcome all who are drawn to our faith and provide resources for resilience for Unitarian Universalism in these difficult times. And boy, these are difficult times. We really do need that. And that's, we're saying we want to speak to that. But, you know, is it true that freedom of belief means that we as UUs can't define what we believe? That we're prevented from that because we have individuals we get to decide ourselves what's true, what's not true? Is that true? Are there problems with that? How do we have a collective conversation? How do we build some sense of a faith with joining together and helping things happen, especially since we root our so much in justice and understandings of commitment? Can UUs believe anything we want? I don't know, but growing up, I sure heard that. Oh, UUs can't believe, you know, whatever you think. You don't know about the Bible, you don't know about God, you just don't know anything. You guys, whatever comes up in your little head, that's what you call faith. Well, that's not true. Is it? Those are interesting things that we have to wrestle with. And so part of it is we're looking at ourselves, what's within our own history and our own theology and understandings that we need to expand further and understand better. So I want to ask you, particularly at this moment in time, with what we're trying to do in our culture and in our faith, with the worth and dignity of everyone, dealing with white supremacy, really trying to have a sense of collective community, where all of us are shaping it and being part of it. So what are some of the myths that hold us back from moving forward as a faith and to really being that kind of inclusive, diverse, and equitable and honoring culture and faith that we say we want and we hold up as part of our vision? So I want to just invite some of you, what are some of the things that you think are holding us back? What for you, or what have you heard? Or what have you heard from others say that get in the way of us being our best selves? Dan?
Yeah, what I hear people say are things like, well, most people of color wouldn't really be interested in Unitarian Universalism. I hear that a lot. And that they have a different way of doing things, a different way of looking at the world. And we're very intellectual, and most Black people are much more emotional when it comes to going to church. And so that it wouldn't be a good fit. That's the kind of things I hear.
Okay. Other thoughts? Thank you. Thank you. Other things people hear.
I think to go along with what Dan said is the notion that, well, if people just came to us, they would fit right in. They would like us. So we don't have to change.
We don't have to change. It's on the other person, right? Okay, I have heard that one myself. other things that get in our way? April.
Yeah, I struggle with and have had to speak up at my own church, which is majority white. And I don't know class background. I don't want to say it's majority middle class. But what I will hear people say is we're just in this white suburb and we're all white and we have people of color there. And it's like not honoring and recognizing the people who are at our church who are people of color or from different class backgrounds. So there's this assumption that we're just this white middle class church without even honoring the people who currently are our members, which is a kind of erasure and has to be addressed all the time.
So when that's heard, are you hearing that say people don't see even the members in their own congregations as middle class? That somehow they created a different category of people of color in their own congregation because they're seeing themselves as middle class? I don't know, I'm asking.
And ask that again, say that again, I'm sorry.
Are people saying, when they say that, are they saying they don't even see the members in their own congregation and pews as middle class people?
So what I hear is we're just this white suburban middle class church. Well, we're not just white and we're not just middle class and we're in Rocky River. And even that people have misconceptions about, which has been, it's all Republican when in fact every precinct has voted Democrat except one in the last 2 presidential elections, right? So there's an elimination, an erasure, and a not accurate perception about who we are. And
so you're not accurately defining who you are yourselves to one another, let alone to other people. I think I heard you say that. I don't want to.
Well, that might be, yeah, I thought I hadn't framed it that way, but thank you for saying it that way. Yeah, I think we're inaccurate about how we view ourselves. And it's again with that dominant culture norm, white middle class, boom.
Okay, gotcha. Other voices, other thoughts. Other thoughts. Susan?
I think one of our most prized myths is that we are very reasonable and that we're in control of our emotions. And yet, boy, have I seen us get emotional when things didn't go our way.
Okay. It doesn't work the way we think it should. It doesn't work on our behalf or the way we've scripted it. It's a problem.
Yeah, and we're not being emotional. We're being totally reasonable in our
temper. We're being logical.
It is logical to be this upset and indignant and I'm leaving.
The way I say that is liberals can be awfully conservative sometimes when they don't get what they want.
Yeah. In fact, are emotions okay in this UU faith? Are emotions actually allowed?
Yeah.
It's dangerous if we think that emotions are being used to manipulate us. So we are cultural, we are sophisticated, we have art, and that's how we sing and we do plays. That's how we express our emotion and our feelings. But we were doing something before COVID where we were putting our hands up and making an archway for the kids to go through, and I had members say that they couldn't raise their arms because it reminded them of the Nazi salute. They felt that if they raised their arms up, they were being carried away. That the next thing they would be, I don't know, speaking in tongues or hailing Hitler. I don't know. But we make some strange leaps that I haven't figured out myself yet.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Linda?
Thanks, Mel. I don't hear much of this at my congregation now because there's a group of us who are, supporting the eighth principle and working towards that. But having said that, there's a lot of quiet pushback from what I would call a white supremacy perspective, because we don't, we're woke, we're liberals. We don't even often recognize where the white supremacy weaves into our lives. So that's the part that I'm seeing now.
I think that's so critical, because I think one of the challenges, particularly of any progressive group and faith groups, particularly ours, is that we perceive ourselves as already woke. Or the folks sitting there think this isn't about me, it's those other white people who do this, or it's these other denominations that don't do this, in fact, and we haven't put ourselves in the big category, so therefore we don't think we have to do work. I think it's a myth that we are smart enough and ready enough and in touch enough to be able to be the kind of people that we talk about and say we lift up with our principles and say the way the world should be, and when we talk about democracy. And that gets in the way of ever getting there. I'm sorry, I don't want to preach, but anyway, it's just a response as I was listening. I think that's good. Carol Dobbins?
Thank you, Reverend Mel. I've heard people say, oh, we can't do that in this church in regards to some sort of ritual. We can't do that in this church because it might trigger someone's religious wounds. I think what that speaks to is that we're not willing to really dig deep about those religious wounds personally, each of us personally, and do that work that needs to be done to heal that ourselves, so that we can enter into community with open hearts.
It's very well said. I think I hear sometimes there's a self-protection. And so we say what other folks are not comfortable with. So because we don't want to go there, or we're afraid, or we're not sure how to go there. It's not always we're afraid. Sometimes people aren't sure, and they don't want to be, we don't like to be wrong. You do not like to be wrong. We want to be right and on the side of justice. So those are just challenges, I think, for us as a faith group. Any other key, Carol?
And the other Carol, actually, Carol hit
Carol.
Carol hit that what I was about to say too, which was this we're kind of walking wounded as far as our in many cases rejections of other faiths, without the healing that's needed to accept what, to move forward from that, and also without the real, there's more of a what we're not than what we are, and there's a lot of misunderstandings and sort of, well, as long as I'm not that, I'm good. It's like, well, that's not what the whole story here is in my book. So I've seen a lot of a lot of the habits come with them, but they feel like if they've rejected the texts, then it's okay. They don't realize that those habits have roots in those texts and in those hierarchies that were part of those other religions. And so the polity and the inherent worth and dignity of everybody really doesn't always come across.
All right.
Mel?
So, yes,
May
Linda.
I? Thank you. I was just thinking what people are saying. It just reminded me, honestly, of January 6th and the response to that event.
Okay, say more.
How now people who supported that event, people who encouraged that event, and others who even spoke more ardently in support of that event and pushing that event are now wanting to be heard as level-minded. Oh, let's just move on. That is such a white thing. That just burns my hiney, Mel. It's such a white thing. We don't want to have to speak up and say, I did something wrong here, or be called on it if we're not willing to say that. So as a white society, we just want to smooth this baby over, not realizing that this is going to come back and harm our country and Constitution if we don't address this directly. And so I'm hoping that, I'm encouraging my representatives. I've been calling them and saying coup, the word coup. This was an attempted coup, and I want this person held responsible. So I'm going to be quiet now.
I think good for you. I don't think you should be quiet about the truth. That's important, that we tell each other the truth. And that's one of the issues. We lift it up so much, and yet we don't always do it. If we believe it's so important, then why don't we do it with ourselves, within our context, where we can help each other? I was thinking, and I'm going to shift this, but I was thinking about our wonderful our poet laureate, and I was so moved by many of the things that she said. But one of them was the way she just talked about it, and we keep talking about the fact that our country's broken. Well, we talk about our UU faith is broken. Maybe we're just not finished yet. And that's a different way of thinking about it. But the fact of the matter is we can't change, as Joan did, took us through the theology and the principles over the ages and the years. This is another moment in time in which we have the opportunity to add more to it, to help us move further down, becoming the vision of what we can see, but not yet the practices that are there to make it happen and make it real. And that seems to me puts us in a different place in space to be able to try and trust with fear and trembling to go ahead. And I think that's part of where we kind of are right now. So I'm going to try and Samuel, I think, is going to try and take us to another point. And thank you for the sharing from all of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, you wonderful people as to who I'm seeing on here. So I didn't get a chance to really speak about something about tradition when we were first discussing that. I see Kelly's laughing there because she knows a little bit about where I'm coming from here. So I have a little bit of a problem with that word, because for me, the word tradition, when it comes to faith and theology, it is built on white supremacy. So when I first became a member of this faith formation in which I am a part of, and I really love this faith, I began to question that. The fact that we're using this word tradition, this living tradition, and therefore as we look back and we step back and we begin to see where we have come from, and therefore how do we change that? There's a remark or a statement was made for those who have the book. It was made at the very onset. It was made by Reverend Earl Holt. And Reverend Earl Holt, I had a chance of meeting him. He said, such ambiguity and concomitant tentativeness in articulating what we are about religiously is presently perhaps our greatest liability and the greatest obstacle to Unitarian Universalism achieving the fulfillment of its potential as an empowering and liberating faith for the 21st century. The fear that any such articulation somehow threatens the integrity or the right of conscience of any individual is institutionally disabling and must be overcome by mutual trust and a sense of common purpose, a belief that we are joined together in religious association for more than merely instrumental reasons. I mean, that is saying a mouthful. A mouthful. So when we begin to actually think of theology, I mean, theology is from the Latin word theologia, I mean, which means that it's the study of faith. Others may say it's a study of God, and it could be that too, but it's a faith formations of your faith, of Unitarian Universalism. And then when we put on top of that faith, we have covenant. Now, what does it mean to have a covenant? Covenant is some kind of an agreement in which 2 or 3 people have, right? It's an agreement between you and me that this is the way how we should be. At the very start of our discussion, there were some agreements in which Carol had read. That's a covenant, all right? It's a covenant in which was made among us as far as who that we're mindful of each other, we're mindful of our times and so forth. So when we began to think of that though, therefore, here we have theology, which is the study of faith. Then we have covenant, and then we have religion on top of that, and then we have mission. I mean, we have all that is happening at one time within our faith. How do we break that out? How do we decipher what it means to be in covenant based upon theology? And that theology sometimes it brings into context
No.
it brings into context our mission. And therefore, I thought someone was saying no there, but I guess it wasn't my no. I'm glad of that part. And therefore, as we begin to look at these interconnectivities we have here, so I kind of, this is what I have done here. I don't know if Joan could bring that up next, but if Joan can't, I can. All right, so take a look at this, friends. Take a look at this here that I have. All right, yeah. All right, so we have mission, right? We have religion, we have covenant, and then we have theology right there. Theology and you. I mean, we could have a theology of food, right? We can. We could have a theology of whatever. It's just a study of a specific beliefs or so forth in which a person may have. As I was reading and researching, going over the Committee on Institutional Change curriculum in which they had sent out, in many ways, there were certain statements in there that I was not expecting to see. Example. It says here that on page 14 of Theology, it says, we are a faith that has not been invested enough in theology, theological schools, or theologians at a time when many who would bring new life and vitality to our communities are looking for guiding principles. It also says, we have not updated our theology, the history we know, the privileges, the dominant culture, and those voices that were preserved in our history and written record. Then it goes on to also say, however, without investment in theology, theological resources to support these times are not available. So what does that tell you about our covenant, friends? What does that tell you about the fact that when you have to sit in your congregation and create a covenant, what does that mean? Do we have the language? Do we have the understanding? Do we have the togetherness of what a covenant represents for you and I? One of the covenants that I have read, which I've always have used, I've always have used in various groups and spaces in which I have been in, is the covenant which has been made by the UUA Board of Trustees. Just listen to what this covenant says. It says, show up with our best selves, intent on listening with openness and a willingness to the voices in the room, that those that are not, and those that are not. Speak with an authentic voice, grounded in our lived experience, mindful of different cultural interpretation and realities that are present. Honor our duty to do the work of the board and to place anti-racism, anti-oppression, multicultural accountability at the center of that work. Recognize that each of us is fully human with hurdles and vulnerability and the need to laugh and sing. That is what a covenant should be like. Because interesting thing about that covenant, it takes into context what? Accountability. Many covenants, sometimes it's when I read from congregations, it is refrain from accountability. It lists all the beautiful things, but it doesn't say, how am I remaining accountable to the 27 folks who I have on here. So we're going to be dividing up in a couple of groups. What I will do, there are some questions in which we have. I'm going to just quickly, I will share this on the whiteboard here that I have, and hopefully we would be able to see it. I hope I could do this right. Let me see if I could just paste it on here, and I guess I cannot paste it on here. Anyway, this is what I will do. I will take that down and I will just read you the questions.
Maybe put them in the chat, Samuel?
I could do that also. I could put them in the chat. All right. Yes, let's do that also. Awesome. So these are the questions that we have for everyone. All right. Do you see them there? The first question, how is the idea of covenant a part of our theology?
They're not showing up in the chat yet. Did you put them to everyone, or did you?
I put them to everyone. The fact you would believe what I didn't do. I didn't hit the enter key. Quite simple.
We got them from in stereo.
There we go. Yeah. So the number one question, or the first question, how is the idea of covenant a part of our theology? Our theology. Covenant. Theology. Where do we see covenant at work in our congregations? And the last question is the one which I like because it brings about accountability. How can returning to covenant practice help us bridge the religious, political, social divisions we see in our families and communities today? So those are the three questions we have. We're going to be dividing up into some groups, and then we're going to be coming back and we're going to share some more thoughts as a larger group. I'm not sure how many minutes we have, Kelly. Is there's about 6 or 7?
We'll have about 8 minutes, 9 minutes for the discussion.
Okay.
And I'll bring
all right.
you back.
So
Okay.
Joan is going to divide us up, and then we will be coming back. Thank you.
I'm about to close the small group rooms, and then we'll be out of here at 8:32. Okay?
People repopulating.
That went so fast.
Yeah. So I'm going to repeat myself a couple times because people are still coming back. But I want to ask, I don't think we'll have time for every group, but if there are some things that were particularly meaningful or interesting to you about this brief discussion you've had regarding covenant, how is it part of our theology? How does it play out in your congregation? And how is returning to that perhaps serve us in the bridge of some of the difficulties we're having these days? Please just, it's going to be a little chaotic, but raise your hand, make some noise, say you'd like to speak. Anybody want to be brave and say something?
I'll go. I'll go.
Okay.
So one of the things about covenanting in which I have learned, and I'm going to put this in our chat here, all right, it's about covenant and colonialism. Sometimes the ways how we have created covenant, sometimes is it done in a way that it is justice? And what is the covenant based on? Is it based upon just a white way of thinking, or is it based on carrying out and promoting justice? Okay, so this was a workshop which was taken at the at our GA last year, and it is word for word. So Alice, I will give you access.
Probably everybody would need it, Samuel.
And everyone will give access. Yeah. So
I'll include it as we mail out information and links to people after this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's an excellent question in the spirit of widening the circle of care. Thank you for bringing that to us, Samuel. What other comments or thoughts might people have? I know the group I was in, we had a really interesting discussion.
Well, I hope Karen will bring up her comments, but I think one of the things we talked about was our covenant is how we want to, at least in the home congregation I'm in, is about how we are with each other, which is super important, but it just barely touches on our accountability to the greater community.
Thank you, Reverend Alice. True that. Anyone else want to offer a comment? I think I would just like, oh, Susan, go ahead.
One of the ideas we discussed, or well, I put it out there. We needed 8 more minutes for each of the second 2 questions. We only got to the first one.
Yeah.
I shared my idea that for me, covenant is sacred because it has to be ensuring everybody's survival in the relationship. And that to me is what gives it sacredness. And I'd always thought of that in terms of sacredness, but that also gives it accountability, at least in my mind.
Great, interesting comments. And I just want to lift up one of Mel Hoover's parting comments about this that I think is very powerful, the idea of not being finished yet. And I think we're moving into understanding that vision of covenant. Mm-hmm. As Karen mentioned in our small group, more of us need to understand what covenant is and the purpose of it, but we're not finished yet. And so we're still working out our practices and how to really live that. We're going to close the conversation about that at this point and take a look at what we hope to be the homework between now and next week. There's two things. And the first thing is talk with two people, probably in your congregation, but maybe not. Maybe you just want to share with someone outside and get that perspective. But talk with two people and share and listen regarding what centering theology in our widening the circle of care might mean in your home congregation. So what it might mean, meaning how might that live out? How might that be actualized in your congregation? And then the second thing is, because I know we're all busy, you may not have read the whole chapter yet. It's, I think, 12 pages. And if you haven't, please do so before our next session. And if you already have, bonus points, but do take a look at it again before we come together again. And on the slide is the resources for that. And Joan is going to send that out. So what I would like to do to finish up before we have our extinguishing the chalice is to just ask everyone to offer one or two words about how they're feeling about right now, about tonight's experience and the future possibilities. And I will start by just saying I am very appreciative and grateful and excited. So I can't see very many people. Joan, can you maybe make the slide go away so we can see each other?
Yep.
Great. Okay. I'm gonna start passing to someone, and we can do that. And if you want to speak, put your hand up. So I'm gonna pass this to Liz Nolan.
I'm a fairly new UU, and I feel good that I learned more not only about the foundation of this church, but also the things we're wrestling with, the
Great.
challenges we have.
Thanks. And who else would like to offer a couple words?
I am always trying to widen my circle.
Indeed. Pat?
I'm glad we're talking about this.
Great. Dan?
I feel inspired.
Valerie?
I'm excited about digging deeper into theology.
Let's see. Carol Dobbins?
I'm feeling a little incomplete. I think this is a good start, but to really discuss this in more detail would be really a good idea.
Next week will help a little bit. Susan?
Yeah, relieved that we actually discussed theology, that we did it. Even if it was just getting our toe in, we dipped our toe in the Jordan River.
There we go. Who else would like to offer a couple words? Karen?
Eager for more, much more.
Great. Keep that burning curiosity going. Anyone else?
Joan?
Joan?
We're grateful for all of you and the fact that you care about this. That is just wonderful.
Now Elise? I can just say ditto since Joe said it first.
Elise?
I'm learning by listening, and I appreciate all the thoughts and these words that you're saying that mean a lot to you, about a lot to all of us, about the changing of tradition, the living tradition. That was very interesting. And I'd like to learn more about that.
Great. April?
I would say curious deeper curiosity into it, and connectingness to the work that many of us have started to do at church, and what that'll look like.
Great. Okay, last call. See any more hands up? I'm going to turn it over to Linda Hale to take us out with the chalice, extinguishing the chalice.
Hey, can I say one thing on the covenant? So I found that maybe I spoke more than my share. And I also found that there were some folks who said nothing. And when we talked about the agreement at the beginning, we talked about kind of sharing airtime and participating. So I hope that we all can find that balance. You know, it's hard, it's not easy, but I want to try and actually hold us accountable.
Linda?
How about the chalice, please? In but a blink, the day is gone. Eventide falls, revealing a kaleidoscope of stars, carpeting the sky in radiance and the promise of wishes fulfilled. O world, sing to us your ancient song in rumbles, low and long in our souls of peace and love, of potential and possibilities. We are the sentinels of your beauty and the stewards of the future. Our time has come.
Thank you,
Amen.
Linda.